If not for waking alone on the sofa, Youngju might have believed the impossible. Bums tracing defined collarbones and lips tasting lips in perfect rhythm. A few blinks cleared away the picture his mind painted in its sleepy haze, a lovely but too realistic dream. The two men had crossed that line back at the waterfall, but he knew better than to think that Song would take advantage of him, especially when countless soju shots had taken a significant toll on his inhibitions. An impressive mint blanket, draped over him at some point during his stupor, fell from him as he sat. He hoped that the alcohol had worked in his favor in some manner, and he hadn't said something untoward, something impossible to come back from. Raking his hand through his hair, head throbbing, Yongju urged last night to the forefront of his mind. Outside the window, shrill chirps felt sardonic, as if they could hear his thoughts, not professional in the slightest. Turns out he hadn't pushed aside his long-standing crush with any success at all. Yongju stretched his arms over his head as he stood, toes enveloped by the plush rug. The bottles the pair polished off last night weren't on the table. The painting Youngju hoped for a better look at in the morning light was gone from the window. He cursed his inability to wake up first. He had to rise early for shoots before, when clients demanded it, but Youngju expected he'd need to beat the sun itself to greet the day before Song. How much sleep did that man even get? The pungency of garlic and onions, since Youngju didn't care for, hit him like a punch to the face. Commonplace around the holidays back home, or when someone had had a little too much to drink. Grandmother insisted she could find a meal to soothe every ailment. In dedicating her life to finding these recipes, many involved these odorous vegetables. Youngju scrunched up his nose as he folded the blanket and laid it with care across the back of the couch. He didn't like the smell, but he did very much enjoy a good drink from time to time. It was torturous that both offenders took a starring role in hangover soup. The flavors almost always elevated a dish, but the smell lingered on his clothes, on his breath, in his pores. That's what Youngju hated the most, but he'd endure for Song. The window, still ajar, allowed him one last healthy breath of fresh air before he went seeking him out. The floorboards creaked, as they often did when he had hoped to avoid announcing his presence. Youngju's fingers touched the diamond stud on his delicate, thankfully, still intact, necklace. At night, he kept it safe on the bedside table, lest it snap in his sleep. He wasn't a restful sleeper per se, but he didn't want to risk it. But last night's alcohol excesses saw it still resting against his collarbone. Loaded dishes at the solid wood tabletop, and the smells intensified. He willed potential distaste from his expression to not greet Song with repulsion. "How much do you normally drink?" Yongju gulped, startled by the sudden question. Or it could be because, when asked it, he had been staring at the way Song's dark black pants hugged his thighs. They clung to impressive muscle in a way that Youngju could only envy. As much as one could feel envy for an inanimate object. A bottle, sometimes two. Youngju pressed the pad of his thumb against the scar at his temple. The pressure gave him temporary relief, and his fingers shielded his redness. It also saved him from having to see the amusement on Song's face. When he dropped his hand, the older man's expression confirmed his mirth, but the look felt more like "you're cute," rather than "how pathetic." The bottles missing from the living room were now atop a very full recycling bin in the corner. There were certainly far more than two. Youngju hoped Song had gone through more than he had. Of the two of them, he'd wager Song had the better tolerance. For a change, Youngju appreciated that the kitchen table didn't see much sunlight. Still wearing his satin pajamas, tinged with clay and booze, he relished being hidden by the gloom. When he looked down to adjust his shirt, Youngju noticed almost half of his buttons had been undone. He scrambled to correct his drunken mishap. On the table were two bowls, each with a pair of chopsticks laid across them, each steaming. Instead of the court placemats, they rested on potholders at the edge of the table. Both windows on either side of the stove were open wide. Cool air flooded the room and carried to Youngju a new smell, Napa cabbage. "I thought you might need this." Even without a smile, today's Song appeared softer. Content, a small victory in Youngju's books. His eyes were somehow warmer, balanced with the jewel-toned plum shirt he wore. Youngju wondered if that had been a purposeful choice or a happy accident. The soup that almost brimmed the bowl did look spectacular. Youngju's insides swirled at the sight. After nights spent imbibing far more than one should, this meal boasted to relieve the after effects. In Youngju's experiences, it never really did, but the way his grandmother made it was as comforting as it was scrumptious. If Song's recipe at all compared, at least Youngju would have a happy stomach. If the patio door weren't open, the call of a bird outside wouldn't have pierced his brain, already bouncing off his skull like an electric prod. Song lifted his bowl, in no rush, to keep the chopsticks balanced and the broth from sloshing. I thought I'd eat outside today. That sounds great. The short walk from the table to the outdoor patio thankfully took less than 10 steps. Youngju's fingers were tingling when he set the bowl back down, this time on sturdier but weather-worn wood. Anchored in the center, a large, unfurled umbrella shielded them both from the sun. Wait. Song's fingers fluttered against Youngju's elbow. A gentle touch, but Youngju had lost his cool over far less in the past. Frozen in place, half standing, half hovering over the bench, Youngju watched Song disappear inside. In that moment, Youngju's stomach let out an angry gurgle, as if it knew Song to be out of earshot. Upon his return, one hand held Soon's. He passed one to Youngju, and over his arm, the cream afghan from the living room. Youngju still hadn't moved. The seat pressed against his calves, leaving him in an awkward forward lean, palms flat on the table. He watched as Song folded the blanket into a thick square. He let the tail overhang protect the backs of Youngju's knees, then placed it on the splintered bench. Upon receiving the signal from Song that it was okay to do so, Youngju sat, nibbling his bottom lip as he did. A hand pressed to his sternum tried to calm the embarrassing thudding, too fast for a mere brush of contact. "Thank you," he finally said. Song gave him a jaw-dropping and still unfamiliar smile in return. With each passing day, he softened more. Youngju would tear down every wall, brick by brick, if Song would let him. It would definitely be all the better for Song's mental state, but Youngju couldn't be sure yet if it was better for his own. The men tucked into their food as nature serenaded and punctuated the early morning. Steam still rose from his bowl as Youngju slid his utensil into the murky broth. Cooling what he gathered on his spoon with a few steady exhales, he sipped. The savory soybean flavor took him back to grandmother's kitchen in an instant. Maybe too heavy on the red pepper flakes for his usual liking, but the extra kick helped clear out the brain fog. He chased the fiery broth down with a spoonful of mushrooms, cabbage, and radish chunks. "You like it?" Youngju nodded. The spoon clinked against the bowl as he swapped them for chopsticks to fish out some sprouts. With threats to devour him from the inside out extinguished, Youngju slurped the last of the broth. The pounding in his ears had subsided too. In this more alert state, Youngju had time to admire how well the man's shirt fitted, the way his Adam's apple moved with each swallow. Song, too engrossed in eating, didn't notice Youngju's appetite had moved past food. For days, Youngju had grown accustomed to solitude and a sturdy back kitchen chair. But that's not where he sat now, and for a moment he'd forgotten, almost introducing his back to the deck. Song's arm shot out behind Youngju, not touching, supporting, as if he saw this coming. Fortunate for Youngju, though, he'd managed to shift his body weight to reverse his near fall. That was one of two mercies the universe had given him. The second, Sam's failure to look up to see Youngju's eyes wide in split-second terror. Back inside at the sink, Youngju lowered his dishes into the soapy water. He wondered if Song's humdrum life would resume when it did come time for Youngju to go. He dried a bowl that Song washed. Would he remember Youngju as that ravishing man from the headshots, or the one unable to stand on his own 2 feet? A familiar scent brought Youngju out of his head. The chopsticks and cloth tugged from his grip. Sandalwood enveloped him, like a warm hug, welcome but firm enough he had to adjust his breathing. "Come with me," Song said. "I want to show you something."